Welcome, weary traveler, to medieval Nocturnes. Tonight, we drift back to the age of longships and legends to explore the life of one of history's most ferocious warriors, the Viking Berserker. We'll follow his journey from a rage-filled child to a battle-hardened legend, and then delve even deeper into the surprising realities of Viking and Spartan life. If you enjoy these journeys into the past, please consider subscribing. It lets me know you're out there, listening in the dark. Now, find a comfortable position, quiet your mind, and let's begin. You are born on a night when the wind howls like a hungry wolf. The midwife, a woman with hands as tough as boiled leather, later swears you did not cry for the first minute. You simply stared at the smoky rafters of the longhouse with a look of intense disapproval, as if you were already finding the world lacking. Then the screaming started. It was not the cry of a helpless infant, but a full-throated roar of pure indignation that rattled the shields hanging on the wall and sent the cats scattering into the night. As a babe, you are less a child and more a small, demanding force of nature. Other infants sleep. You seem to be in a constant, silent battle with your swaddling clothes, straining against them until your face turns the color of a sunset. Your father, a stoic man named Bjorn, tries to soothe you by carving a small wooden horse. You take one look at it, grab it with a surprisingly strong fist, and immediately try to eat its head. The family decides you are not suited for toys. By the time you can walk, you don't. You charge. Your first steps are a clumsy, headlong rush into a basket of freshly caught fish, sending herring flying across the dirt floor. Your mother, Sigrid, sighs and simply starts storing the fish on a higher shelf. You treat every object as a challenge. A barrel is for pushing over. A hanging tapestry is for pulling down. A sleeping dog is for waking up with a loud, experimental shout. The dog, a veteran of many raids, simply opens one eye, groans, and goes back to sleep, having seen scarier things. Your vocabulary develops slowly, mostly because you find that a well-timed growl gets your point across faster than words. Your first word isn't mother or father. It is again shouted with glee after you accidentally knock over a pail of milk and watch it spread across the floor. Your parents exchange a worried glance. The desire for repeatable chaos is a new and troubling development in your young personality. Other children in the village learn to give you a wide berth, while they play games of throwing stones or mock battles with sticks. You prefer your own solitary activities. These mostly involve seeing how long you can yell at the sea before your throat gets sore, or testing the structural integrity of fence posts with your forehead. You don't have friends, you have witnesses. They watch from a safe distance, their games paused as you attempt to wrestle a large piece of driftwood. The village elders start to talk. Some say you are touched by the gods, blessed by Odin with a warrior's spirit. Others, more practically, suggest it might just be a bad diet. The village shaman, a man who speaks more to crows than to people, observes you for an afternoon and declares that you have the fire of the bear in your soul. Your grandmother insists it's just indigestion and recommends more fermented cabbage. But deep down, everyone knows you are not destined to be a farmer, carefully tending to rows of barley. You are not meant to be a fisherman, patiently mending nets under the pale sun. You are a tool being forged for a very specific purpose. You are a storm in the shape of a small boy, and the world is full of things that are just waiting to be broken. Your journey has only just begun. Your childhood is less a collection of memories and more a tally of property damage. While other Viking children are learning essential life skills, like how to tie a proper knot or how to tell which mushrooms won't kill you, you are mastering the art of unintentional destruction. The first practice sword your father carves for you lasts less than a day, not because you are training diligently, but because you use it to try and chop down a support beam in the longhouse during breakfast, curious to see if the roof will wobble. It does. Your father just sighs and adds another notch to his things. The boy has broken stick. You are forbidden from entering the chicken coop after a series of escalating incidents. It began with simple curiosity, watching the birds peck at the ground. This quickly evolved into an attempt to organize them into a feathered army. When they failed to follow your roared commands, you challenged the largest rooster to a trial by combat. The rooster, a proud and surprisingly aggressive creature named Redcomb, promptly wins by pecking you on the nose. Humiliated, you declare a vendetta. No one sees what happens next, but you are later found with a single red feather tucked behind your ear, a look of grim satisfaction on your face. Redcomb is never seen again. At age 6, you decide you need a proper shield. You fashion one from the lid of a discarded fish barrel and, with a mighty yell, charge headfirst into the family's laundry, which is hanging out to dry. Clean tunics and trousers fly through the air like startled birds. Your mother, watching from the doorway, shakes her head and calls you a storm in the shape of a boy. Your grandmother, ever the spiritual one, tells the neighbors you are clearly possessed by the spirit of a great warrior. You, however, are just happy you managed to break the clothesline pole. You are not driven by malice. There is no cruelty in your actions. There is only a boundless, chaotic energy and a deep-seated need to see what happens when things are pushed, struck, or chased. If an object is standing, it must be toppled. If something makes a noise, it must be investigated with a stick. If a creature runs from you, it must be pursued until one of you gets tired or falls into a ditch. The village learns to adapt to your presence. Fences are reinforced. Children's play areas are moved further from your family's longhouse. One of the older boys, in a moment of bravery or foolishness, calls you goat-brained. You respond by tackling him into a deep snowdrift where he remains until his friends can dig him out. From that day on, you are known as Snowbreaker, a name you carry with immense pride. It sounds much more impressive than the boy who headbutts things. Your only real companion in these early years is a large, shaggy sheepdog named Thoric. He is the only living creature that doesn't seem to fear you, and occasionally has the good sense to intervene in your worst ideas. He once saved you from serious injury by barking incessantly after you attempted to climb the slippery, fish gut-covered scaffolding used for drying haddock. You fell, but a large pile of fish broke your fall. To this day, you carry the faint scent of smoked fish, a permanent reminder of your failed ascent. The village elders occasionally discuss sending you to the temple for some kind of spiritual intervention. The local Gothi, the priest of the old gods, politely but firmly declines. He has seen the way you look at his ceremonial drinking horn and does not wish to see it tested against a stone wall. So you remain a wild child of mud and splinters, a walking, shouting, untamed problem that the village is slowly realizing might one day be pointed at their enemies. By the time you turn 8, the question is no longer what is wrong with him, but how can we use him? There is a look in your eye when you stare into a thunderstorm, not of fear, but of professional respect, as if you are sizing up a worthy opponent. You don't just run, you charge. Through puddles, over fences, and occasionally through the thin wattle-and-daub wall of a neighbor's shed. The village is learning that you are not a curse. You are a weapon in its rawest form, waiting to be aimed. Your appetite becomes the stuff of village legend. You don't just eat, you wage a one-man war on every meal placed before you. During one harvest feast, you are so focused on consuming a roasted boar that you fail to notice your own sleeve has caught fire from a nearby candle. You only look up when the smell of burning wool finally overpowers the aroma of cooked pork, at which point you calmly douse the flame in a horn of ale and go right back to eating, leaving the entire table staring in stunned silence. Your body is a testament to a life lived without caution. It's a canvas of fading bruises, fresh scratches, and the occasional splinter you've forgotten about. The village healer, a patient woman named Freya, gives up on traditional remedies. Instead of applying poultices, she simply teaches you how to pull splinters out with your teeth, and how to distinguish between a cut that needs moss and one that will probably stop bleeding on its own. She calls it preventative medicine, though it looks more like damage control. You begin to develop a laugh. It's not a sound of joy or mirth. It's a deep, guttural rumble that starts in your chest and erupts out of you, usually after you've done something particularly reckless, like trying to jump from one rooftop to another. You once let out this laugh after successfully wrestling a ram to a standstill. You didn't harm the animal, but you left it so thoroughly confused that it simply lay down and refused to move for the rest of the day. The laugh unnerves people. It sounds less human and more like rocks grinding together. Your collection of weapons grows. You find a large, gnarled tree branch, heavy as an anvil, and name it Nidnaker. You carry it everywhere, practicing swings against unsuspecting birch trees, some of which do not survive the encounter. You also have a favorite rock, smooth and flat, which you call the silencer. You haven't used it on anyone, but you enjoy holding it and thinking about all the things you could silence with it, like noisy birds or the creaking door of the longhouse. Your parents have long since abandoned any hope of assigning you domestic chores. The last time they asked you to stack firewood, you decided it would be more efficient to build a single, massive tower that promptly collapsed, taking out a section of the fence and startling a passing merchant's pony. The pony bolted, scattering its goods all over the path. You were not punished. By this point, everyone understood that containing you was more important than correcting you. The village elders hold a meeting about you. It's not held in hushed whispers, but in a formal council, as if discussing a matter of state. They agree you are too valuable to be cast out and too dangerous to be ignored. One elder suggests you might be touched by Odin, a gift to the village. Another argues you were probably just dropped on your head as a baby. Gore the Limp, a one-eyed veteran of countless raids, simply watches you from a distance, squints his good eye, and declares he has the fury. He just needs to learn where to point it. You are no longer just a rambunctious child. You are becoming a primal force, a creature of instinct and impulse. Wolves give your family's farm a wide berth, and birds fall silent in the trees when you stomp past. You are turning into the very thing that Norse mothers tell stories about to scare their children into behaving. A walking, roaring embodiment of the wild North. And your formal education in violence is about to begin. You're not aware of these discussions. You're too busy having a staring contest with a goat. You believe you are winning. The goat, chewing placidly, is not participating. This singular focus, this unshakable and often misplaced confidence, is precisely what the elders are counting on. You are not a boy to be taught. You are a force to be unleashed. At the age of 10, your formal training begins. It's less an organized curriculum and more a reluctant acceptance of the inevitable. The man tasked with shaping your rage is Gore the Limp, the one-eyed veteran who saw your potential. His training method is simple. He puts you in front of something and lets you destroy it, occasionally offering gruff, one-word advice like harder, lower, or no. He doesn't bother teaching you proper form because he recognizes that your form is chaos itself, a whirlwind of flailing limbs and furious roaring that is impossible to correct and terrifying to behold. Your first lesson involves a large, suspended log, which you are told to treat as an enemy. While other boys are taught parries and footwork, you are simply unleashed. You charge the log, headbutting it so hard that it swings back and knocks you flat. You get up, shake your head, and charge it again, this time biting it. Gore watches from a safe distance, stroking his beard and nodding slowly. He isn't teaching you how to fight. He is studying you like a scholar observing a natural disaster. You are not given a practice axe. Gore declares that a dull blade is an insult to your spirit. Instead, he hands you an old, chipped axe that has seen better days. Try not to lose a foot, he grunts, before stepping back. You thank him by swinging it wildly, narrowly missing his good ear and embedding the axe head in a nearby cartwheel. Gore doesn't flinch. He just looks at the ruined wheel and says, "Good power, bad aim." This becomes the summary of your entire martial education. You are also introduced to wrestling, a cornerstone of Viking life. Your first match is against a boy named Eric, who is a full head taller than you and known for his strength. The match begins. Eric circles you, looking for an opening. You don't circle, you charge, screaming, and clamp your teeth onto his shoulder. The match ends abruptly. Eric is declared the winner on a technicality, but he never agrees to wrestle you again. You consider this a moral victory. Gore's lessons are unconventional. He teaches you how to fall from a short height and come up roaring. He has you practice your battle scream by yelling at cliffs until birds fly from their nests a mile away. He doesn't teach you strategy or tactics. He teaches you how to be an event. An army can plan for a shield wall, he tells you one day, but no one plans for a boy who thinks a tree owes him money. You take part in group training, but you are never part of the group. While the other boys practice marching in formation, you are usually off to the side, trying to see if you can intimidate a boulder into moving. During battle chant practice, you don't learn the words. You simply find the rhythm and bellow along with it, a wordless, primal roar that throws off the timing of everyone else, but adds a certain terrifying energy to the performance. Your training does not tame you, it sharpens your edges. It gives your rage a vague sense of direction, like a flood being channeled into a slightly wider, deeper ditch. You do not learn discipline, footwork, or defense. You learn that your greatest weapon is unpredictability. You learn that if you are loud enough and angry enough, people will simply get out of your way. And Gore the Limp, your reluctant mentor, knows that the time is coming when he will no longer be pointing you at logs and trees, but at real enemies. By age 12, your reputation has outgrown your body. You are known across the local fjords, not just as a boy, but as a phenomenon. Tales of your chaotic deeds are told as cautionary stories. And one farmer from a neighboring village swears you once scared his prize-winning pig so badly it refused to eat for a week. The time for informal training is over. It's time for you to be officially brought into the Berserker Brotherhood through the rite of the beast. The ceremony is not announced. One evening, Gore the Limp simply appears at your longhouse door, his one eye glinting in the firelight. He says nothing, merely beckons with a single gnarled finger. You understand immediately. You follow him out into the deep, silent forest, the crunch of snow under your boots, the only sound. There is no fear in you, only a thrumming excitement, a feeling that you are finally walking towards your true purpose. Deep within a clearing, a bonfire rages, sending sparks dancing up towards the stars. Around it stand 5 immense men, their bare chests a tapestry of scars and faded blue tattoos. They are unnervingly still, watching you approach with the placid intensity of wolves. One of them, a giant with a braided beard that reaches his belt, holds a wooden bowl. He nods at you, a gesture that is both a welcome and a warning. The first part of the rite involves being marked. You are stripped to the waist, and the giant begins to paint symbols on your chest and back. The paint is a thick, black paste made from ash, bear fat, and crushed herbs that smell of damp earth and something sharp like lightning. The runes are not for courage or strength. They are patterns of binding and unleashing, meant to call forth the beast within you and give it form. Then comes the cloak. It is the skin of a great mountain bear, heavy and smelling of pine, dried blood, and ancient rage. As it is draped over your shoulders, you feel a weight that is more than just physical. It feels like a legacy. Gore tells you the bear was a legendary beast that terrorized the northern passes for a generation before it was finally brought down. The cloak still has the bear's massive skull attached, its empty eyes staring out over your head like a grim guardian. You are handed a horn filled with a dark, steaming liquid. It is not alcoholic. It is something older, something wilder. You drink it down in one go, as is expected. The taste is bitter, like roots and iron, and a strange warmth spreads through your veins. The world sharpens. The flames of the bonfire seem to whisper your name, and the chanting of the berserkers becomes the rhythm of your own heartbeat. Now you must embrace the beast. You are expected to dance, to roar, to enter the frenzy. But you do not flail wildly. A strange calm descends upon you. You begin to move with a predatory grace you have never possessed, your body low to the ground, your movements mimicking the bear whose skin you now wear. You let out a low growl that silences the chanting. The older berserkers watch, their eyes wide with surprise and respect. You are not just acting like a beast, you are becoming one. When the ritual ends, as the first rays of dawn touch the sky, you are given your new name, Fenrir's Maw, for the ferocity of your bite. You are no longer a boy. You are a berserker. You are now a berserker in training, an official member of a brotherhood bound by rage and ritual. Your new name, Fenrir's Maw, precedes you. The villagers no longer see you as a troublesome boy, but as something far more dangerous and valuable. They give you a wider berth than ever, a space of both fear and reverence. Now that you wear the bear skin, it's time to learn the deeper secrets of the craft, how to summon the fury on command. This sacred art is known among the elders simply as unleashing the mind. There are many paths to the berserker trance. Some warriors fast for days, honing their hunger into a weapon. Others use rhythmic, hypnotic chanting and drumming, beating themselves into a frenzy. A few even use pain, cutting themselves just before a battle, to awaken the beast with the sting of their own blood. But you are introduced to the quickest and most unpredictable method: the mushrooms. They are not the friendly, brown-capped kind you find in stews. They are small, mottled, and deeply suspicious-looking fungi that grow only in the darkest parts of the ancient forest. Gore hands you a small leather pouch of them without ceremony. "Chew, don't think," is all he says. You obey. The taste is profoundly earthy, like a mouthful of soil, moss, and bitter regret. Within minutes, the world begins to shift. The edges of your vision swim, and the wind rustling through the pines starts to sound like whispers, speaking a language you almost understand. The ground beneath your feet feels like it's breathing, rising and falling with a slow, steady rhythm. You are ready. Your first test in this state involves a training dummy, a straw-filled man clad in old leather. But you don't see a dummy. You see a frost giant, its stitched mouth twisted into a sneer, its button eyes glowing with malice. You let out a roar that comes from a place deeper than your lungs, and you charge. To the others watching, you are a whirlwind of chaotic motion, swinging your axe with no regard for form or safety. But in your mind, you are locked in an epic battle from the sagas, dodging spectral blows and landing mighty strikes against a mythical foe. The trance consumes you completely. Time loses all meaning. You are not sure if you have been fighting for minutes or for hours. You are only brought back to reality when you collapse from sheer exhaustion, your muscles screaming and your mind a foggy haze. You wake up some time later, nestled in the high branches of an oak tree, clutching a pine cone you vaguely remember believing was a dragon's egg. You have no memory of climbing the tree. This, Gore tells you later, is a sign of a successful journey. While the other berserkers nod in approval, you learn that this path is not for everyone. Some find the visions too distracting, the loss of control too absolute. They prefer the clarity of hunger or the rhythm of the war drum. But for you, the brain lightning of the mushrooms feels like coming home. It doesn't just unleash your rage, it gives it shape, color, and a story. It turns you from a man into a monster of myth. This is the true purpose of the ritual. It's not just about being a good fighter. It's about becoming something more than human, a terrifying force of nature that enemies will flee from on sight. You are learning to shed your skin, to let the beast that has always lived inside you take complete control. You are no longer just learning to fight. You are learning how to become the storm itself. And soon, you will be unleashed upon a real battlefield. The day finally arrives. It hangs in the air, smelling of sea salt and sharp steel. Your first real battle. You wake not with fear, but with a profound sense of calm. Today is the day you were born for. You forego breakfast, not out of ritual, but because the knot of anticipation in your stomach leaves no room for food. Instead, you sit by the fire for an hour, methodically sharpening your axe against a whetstone. The rhythmic scrape, the only sound you make. The other warriors give you a wide berth. They are preparing for a fight. You are preparing for a feast of violence. Before you march to the ships, you are given your ritual pouch of mushrooms. You chew them slowly, thoughtfully, letting the earthy taste coat your tongue. As the war band gathers on the shore, the other warriors chant and beat their shields. You stand slightly apart, the bare skull on your cloak staring blankly ahead. You don't chant, you just breathe, deep and slow, feeling the brain lightning begin to crackle behind your eyes. Your muscles twitch with contained energy. As your longship cuts through the gray waves and the enemy coastline appears as a thin, dark line, the world begins to change. The vibrant greens and browns of the landscape intensify. The rhythmic creak of the ship's timbers and the shouting of your comrades fade into a low hum, replaced by the sound of blood roaring in your ears. You grip the handle of your axe, your knuckles white. A low growl escapes your lips, and this time, no one tells you to be quiet. And then, the frenzy hits. The moment your feet touch the shore, you charge. There is no thought, no strategy, just a pure, explosive release of everything you have ever been. You move with the brutal efficiency of an avalanche, a chaotic mass of muscle and fury that simply overwhelms everything in its path. You are not a warrior executing techniques. You are a natural disaster happening to a line of terrified men. Pain becomes a distant, interesting sensation. An arrow slices your arm, and you barely notice, more annoyed that it tore your cloak. A spearman tries to block your path, and you simply run him over, not even breaking your stride. You lose your axe at some point, the shaft splintering against an enemy's shield. Undeterred, you rip the shield from his grasp and begin using it as a blunt, devastating weapon, swinging its heavy wooden edge with reckless abandon. This is the Berserker gang, the legendary fury of the Norsemen, and you are completely lost to it. Your mind is gone, replaced by the howling spirit of the bear. You fight with your fists, your feet, your teeth. You are a whirlwind of destruction, unreachable and uncontrollable. Your comrades know to stay clear, letting you carve a path of terror through the enemy ranks. At one point, you tackle a bannerman and become entangled in the flag, fighting your way out of the fabric with a muffled roar. When the dust finally begins to settle, the battle is over. The frenzy recedes slowly, like a fever breaking. You stand panting in a field of carnage, covered in mud, blood, and torn cloth. Gore the limp has to physically pull you away from an enemy you had continued to pummel long after he had fallen. You blink, looking at the devastation around you as if seeing it for the first time. You turn to Gore, your mind still foggy, and ask, "Is there any mead left?" You have survived. You have unleashed the storm and lived to tell the tale. The other warriors no longer look at you as a boy playing at war. They look at you with the profound, terrified respect reserved for something that is no longer entirely human. You are officially a berserker. You may have noticed something during your inaugural battle. You were conspicuously underdressed, while your fellow warriors were sensibly clad in chainmail, sturdy leather jerkins, and iron helmets. You strode onto the battlefield, wearing little more than trousers, a furious expression, and your now sacred bearskin cloak. This is not an oversight. This is the way of the berserker. The philosophy is brutally simple. Armor is for men who expect to be hit. Your strategy, if such a chaotic rampage can be called a strategy, is to be so terrifying that no one dares try to hit you. Armor is heavy, it restricts movement, it muffles your war cry. How can you properly flail, leap, and roll through a terrified enemy line when you are weighed down by interlocking rings of steel? Freedom of movement is paramount because your combat style is less about fencing and more about being a violent, unpredictable blur. Your bearskin cloak is the only armor you need. It is not meant to stop a blade, though its thick hide might turn a clumsy swing. Its true purpose is psychological. draped over your shoulders, with the skull of the great bear staring out from above your own head, you cease to look entirely human. You become a monster from a fireside tale, a hulking, half-animal creature that has no place on a human battlefield. You are not a soldier. You are an omen. In the absence of steel, your own body becomes your shield. Every scar is a medal, a story etched into your skin that proves you have faced blades and walked away. Every callus on your knuckles is a testament to your ferocity. You don't fear wounds, you collect them. Pain is simply a reminder that the battle isn't over yet. After one raid, you discover a deep gash on your forearm. Only when you try to lift a leg of mutton to your mouth and find your grip is weak. You are not alarmed by the injury, only annoyed that it is interfering with your meal. This blatant disregard for self-preservation is your most effective weapon. A shield wall, the bedrock of Norse warfare, is built on discipline and courage. But it is not designed to withstand a shirtless, screaming madman who seems to actively welcome injury. The sight of you charging, roaring, and bleeding without slowing down does more to break enemy morale than a volley of arrows. They see you, and they don't see a man they can fight. They see a force of nature they can only run from. Other warriors in your warband watch you with a mixture of awe and profound relief that you are on their side. They might think you are insane. They know you are insane, but they also know that when you are unleashed, enemy lines crumble. They will stick to their mail and helmets, happy to let you be the one to absorb the enemy's terror. So you continue to walk into battle, dressed for a cold day's foraging, rather than a fight to the death. You have no need for iron plates or a visored helm. Your armor is a potent, invisible triad. The fury in your heart, the bear on your back, and the absolute certainty that you are harder to kill than anyone you are about to meet. There is, however, a significant drawback to channeling the spirit of a furious bear. Once the blood-red haze of the berserker gang descends, your ability to distinguish friend from foe becomes ... unreliable. In the heat of the trance, every moving shape is a threat, every shout is a challenge, and every shield, no matter the emblem, looks like a target. Your comrades learn this the hard way. Your first friendly fire incident is minor. After a successful skirmish, a fellow warrior claps you on the back in celebration. You, still simmering with the dregs of the frenzy, spin around and headbutt him squarely in the chest, sending him stumbling backward into a mud puddle. He sits there, covered in filth, and just shakes his head. Fair enough, he mutters, understanding that celebrating with you requires a certain degree of risk. But the incidents escalate. During a chaotic raid on a fortified town, you mistake your own chieftain's prized polished helmet for an enemy signal. With a roar, you charge him, axe raised high. Only a desperate shout of your name from 3 different warriors at once makes you pause, confused, your axe hovering inches from the chieftain's head. He simply looks at you, his eyes wide, and slowly backs away. You grunt, distracted by a real enemy, and charge off, the near disaster forgotten in an instant. The chieftain does not forget. You never apologize for these things. The concept is foreign to you in your battle state. Afterwards, when the haze has lifted, you might offer a confused shrug or a hunk of roasted meat as a silent peace offering. Your warband learns to accept this. They understand that you are not in control. Complaining about you would be like complaining about the wind for blowing too hard or the sea for being too rough. It is simply your nature. To survive you, your comrades develop a set of unofficial rules. Rule 1. Never stand directly behind you when a battle is about to start. Rule 2. If you start roaring at an inanimate object, like a tent or a wagon, just let it happen. It's better for you to exhaust your fury on the tent. Rule 3. They create a special signal, a long, low blast on a horn, that essentially means Fenrir's maw is off his leash. Mind your backs. Eventually, they assign you a minder. His name is Olaf, the Steady, a man built like a small mountain whose main job in a battle is not to fight enemies, but to manage you. He follows you at a distance, using his enormous shield to gently nudge you back in the right direction if you start charging towards your own ships, or to physically haul you off an ally you've accidentally tackled. He is the calm anchor to your raging storm. Despite the occasional friendly bruising and the constant low-level anxiety you cause, the warband wouldn't sail without you. The calculation is simple. The fear you instill in your enemies is worth the risk of a few accidental tackles and one nearly decapitated chieftain. You are a weapon of terror, a force that shatters shield walls and breaks morale just by showing up. You are their greatest asset and their most dangerous liability, a walking, roaring paradox of war. They need your chaos to win, even if it means they might have to dodge your axe in the process. You are the storm, and while sometimes the storm hits friendly shores, it is still the most powerful force on the sea. Your name begins to carry a weight of its own, traveling on the winds and in the whispers of merchants between ports. But the stories they tell are not just of your bravery. They are tales of pure, baffling chaos. You are known in one village as Tide Shouter after someone saw you standing on a cliff, yelling at the ocean for being too loud. In another, you are called He Who Fights Scarts after you single-handedly dismantled a merchant's wagon because you didn't like the way one of its wheels squeaked. You don't bother to correct these stories. A fearsome reputation, no matter how strange, is a weapon in itself. This psychological warfare becomes your greatest asset before your longship even scrapes the shore of an enemy beach. Rumors of your presence have already done half the work. Enemy warriors hear that Fenrir's maw is among the raiders, and they remember the tales. They picture a giant who eats shields for breakfast and arm wrestles bears for fun. When they finally see you shirtless, covered in old scars and fresh blood, roaring like a demon, the reality is somehow even more terrifying than the myth. They don't see a man, they see a legend come to life, and their courage crumbles. After the fighting is done, the damage control begins. You typically come out of your frenzy with a splitting headache and a collection of strange, useless items you have no memory of acquiring. After one raid, you wake up clutching a single, perfectly intact chicken, which you name Spoils. Your chieftain, a man of infinite patience, has to manage the fallout. This often involves paying for things you've broken in your fury, like a fishing boat you accidentally shoved out to sea, or a fence you mistook for an enemy shield wall. Your handler, Olaf, the Steady, finds his duties extend long after the battle is over. He becomes your shadow, gently guiding you away from anything flammable, valuable, or easily breakable. He is the one who has to remind you that feast tables are for eating on, not for flipping over in a show of enthusiasm. He once had to talk you down from trying to tame the village blacksmith's anvil because you were convinced it was being defiant. The skalds, the Viking poets and storytellers, have a field day with your exploits. They weave your chaotic deeds into their sagas, exaggerating them for dramatic effect. Your accidental toppling of a woodpile becomes an epic battle against a fortress of logs. Your roar, which in reality is just a very loud shout, is described in song as having the power to crack stones and curdle milk in nearby cows. You become the hero of ballads like The Wrath of Fenrir's Maw and the more comedic The Tale of the Terrified Goat. You are no longer just a warrior. You are a walking piece of folklore, a moving cautionary tale with broad shoulders and absolutely zero impulse control. You don't have to prove your strength with fancy armor or a gleaming sword. Your reputation precedes you, a wave of fear and absurdity that unnerves your enemies and reassures your allies. In the brutal, honor-bound world of the Vikings, you have become incredibly valuable, not just for the enemies you can defeat, but for the stories you create. And these stories, wild and inaccurate as they are worth more than any amount of silver or gold. They are the currency of fear, and you are the richest man in the North. You never planned to fall in love. The entire concept is alien to you. Emotions are complicated, messy things that can't be solved with an axe or a loud shout. Most berserkers avoid such entanglements, preferring the simple clarity of battle and brotherhood. But one day, between a raid on a coastal monastery and an unfortunate incident involving a stolen beehive, it happens. Her name is Runa, and she is a weaver, known for her sharp tongue and her complete lack of patience for fools. You are instantly captivated. She is utterly unimpressed by you. While other villagers shrink away when you approach, she just squints at you and continues her work. Your first attempt at conversation is a disaster. You try to impress her by lifting one end of an overturned longship that a team of men is struggling with. You heave it into the air with a mighty roar. Runa simply watches, then points out that you're now standing on her prize-winning pumpkin patch. She then asks if you plan on paying for the damages. Your usual methods of intimidation are useless. You try to win her affection the only way you know how. With demonstrations of strength and ferocity, you bring her the helmet of a Saxon warrior you defeated. She looks at it, then at you, and asks, "What am I supposed to do with this? It will clash with the curtains." You wrestle your handler, Olaf the Steady, to the ground and look at her for approval. She just shakes her head and tells you both to stop making a scene. Against all odds, she eventually agrees to walk with you along the cliffs. The conversation is painfully awkward. You don't know how to flirt, so you resort to what you know best, interacting with the landscape. You punch a large rock to show how strong you are. You roar at a flock of seagulls to show how fearsome you are. She simply laughs, a sound that is both mocking and genuinely amused. It is the first time you've heard anyone laugh at you without fear, and you find you don't mind it. Your fellow berserkers are confused by this development. Is she a witch? One asks, unable to comprehend why you would spend time with someone you aren't actively fighting or robbing. You try to explain that she makes the world feel quieter, which only confuses them more. Quiet is for the dead, another grumbles, before going back to sharpening his blade. One day, Runa gives you a gift. It is a simple armband, woven from dark wool and red thread in a complex pattern of knots. It has no magical properties. It offers no protection, but you wear it always. It becomes your anchor. In the swirling madness of the berserker gang, the feel of the woven wool against your skin is a faint, distant reminder that there is a world beyond the rage, a quiet place to return to. The relationship is strange. She doesn't tame you, no one could, but she grounds you. She is the calm eye of the hurricane that is your life. You bring her interesting skulls you find in the woods. She mends the tears in your cloak. You are a force of pure chaos, and she is a master of intricate order. Somehow, it works. After battle comes the feast, the reward for a successful raid and for not having been killed. The great longhouse fills with the smell of roasting meat, spilled ale, and sweating warriors. For most, it is a time for celebration, song, and camaraderie. For you, it is simply a different kind of chaos, one with fewer sharp edges, but just as much potential for destruction. You always make a memorable entrance. You arrive late, usually after Olaf the Steady has spent an hour trying to scrub the worst of the battle grime off you. You stride into the hall, shirtless and scarred, perhaps dragging a large, interesting-looking boulder you found on the way and felt the chieftain needed to see. The feasting hall falls silent for a moment, as everyone turns to watch, before erupting into a cheer. Your brand of madness is always welcome entertainment. Then comes the drinking. Mead and ale flow like rivers, and you approach the drinking horn with the same commitment you show on the battlefield. No hesitation, no restraint. You don't sip, you conquer. You once challenged another warrior to a drinking contest and, in your impatience, decided to bypass the horns entirely, attempting to drink straight from the spigot of a giant barrel of mead. The resulting spray soaked 3 tables and the chieftain's prized wolfhound before anyone could stop you. Your table manners are a constant source of awe and concern. You see a whole roasted pig on the table and declare the serving knife to be insulting to such a noble beast. You then proceed to carve it with your battle axe, sending chunks of pork flying in all directions. You treat the communal bread bowl as a personal challenge, attempting to eat an entire loaf in one sitting. You do not succeed, but your valiant effort is noted and will be sung about for years. When the skalds begin to tell tales of the raid, you are a terrible audience member. You don't have the patience for narrative. If a story is about you, you feel the need to act it out, which usually involves roaring, jumping onto a table, and demonstrating a particular axe swing, much to the terror of those sitting nearby. Your contributions to the storytelling are less verbal and more percussive. Inevitably, a friendly brawl breaks out. It's a staple of any good feast. Often, you are the cause. This time, you take offense to a skald's particularly mournful song about a fallen hero. Finding the tune too quiet, you decide to liven things up by grabbing the nearest warrior and attempting to wrestle him. Within minutes, half the hall is a joyous, drunken tangle of flying fists and overturned benches. The chieftain just sighs and takes a long drink. It's all part of the experience. By the time the sun rises, the feast is over. The great hall is a wreck of splintered wood, spilled drink, and snoring warriors. You are usually found in the most unlikely of places. Once, you were discovered asleep in the rafters, and another time, curled up inside a large, empty cauldron, using a stolen ham as a pillow. You don't just attend a feast, you survive it. Every legendary warrior has one story they don't tell, a single, mortifying failure that haunts their otherwise glorious reputation. This is yours. It is known in the hushed, giggling corners of the longhouse as the incident of the goose farm. It begins, as most disasters do, with overconfidence. The target is a small, poorly defended settlement on a misty coastline, an easy raid. Perfect for training new recruits and securing a bit of silver. You, as always, are the first one off the longship. You hit the beach with a tremendous roar, your axe in hand, ready to unleash the storm. You charge up the grassy hill towards the small turf-roofed buildings, expecting to meet a terrified militia or at least a few panicked farmers. Instead, you are met by a flock of geese, not just any geese. These are enormous, white birds with eyes full of ancient malice and necks like angry snakes. Most sane creatures would flee from the sight of you. These geese are not sane. As you charge towards them, they don't scatter. They form a line. They lower their heads, stretch out their necks, and hiss, a sound like 100 punctured lungs. And then they charge you. You are so taken aback by this turn of events that you falter for a second. That second is all they need. The battle is a whirlwind of feathers, honking, and profound humiliation. You swing your axe, but they are too low and fast. You try to kick them, but they peck at your shins with their hard, unforgiving beaks. You roar, and they simply honk back, louder and more aggressively. In the chaos, you trip over a particularly brave goose and land face first in a large, squelching mud puddle. The geese, sensing victory, swarm you, pecking at your bearskin cloak and pulling at your hair. The raid comes to an abrupt halt when a single, elderly woman emerges from the largest hut holding a broom. She is not frightened, she is annoyed. She looks at you, the mighty Fenrir's maw, currently being defeated by her flock, and scolds you. "Look what you've done," she yells. "You've upset Gertrude. She won't lay for a week. There is no glorious battle. There is no silver." Your warband watches in stunned silence as you are berated by an old woman for disturbing her birds. Defeated, you make the long, silent retreat back to the ship, covered in mud, feathers, and shame. For the entire journey home, no one speaks. Olaf the Steady just methodically picks bits of goose down from your beard. The story spreads like wildfire. The skalds compose a jaunty, infuriating tune about the berserker who was bested by birds. You try to defend your honor, insisting that they were no ordinary geese, that they were feathered demons with the hearts of dragons. No one believes you, and so your legend grows, but with a new, humbling chapter. You are the man who can break a shield wall, the warrior who frightens armies, and the only berserker in living memory to have been forced into a tactical retreat by paltry. The years pass, measured not in calendars, but in the silvering of your beard and the satisfying ache in your bones on a cold morning. You are older now, not wise, not by a long shot, but you have achieved something most berserkers never do: seniority. Your rage, once a wildfire, has burned down to glowing hot embers. It's still there, but it's a deeper, more patient heat. You don't go on as many raids. The long sea voyages are harder on your joints, and you've found that the mushrooms don't agree with you the way they used to. Now, they mostly just give you a headache and a profound desire to argue with clouds. Instead, you have become the guardian of the village, a living, breathing deterrent to any would-be attackers. Your presence alone is worth more than a dozen younger warriors. No one wants to raid the village that is being watched over by Fenrir's maw. You have taken up storytelling, though your methods are unconventional. You gather the village children and recount your great battles. Your stories are less about words and more about performance art. They consist of dramatic reenactments, guttural roars, and the occasional miming of biting a shield. The children are perpetually terrified and entertained. You also spend long afternoons explaining battle tactics to your old dog Thoric, who is now mostly deaf and sleeps through your entire saga. Occasionally, a young warrior, full of fire and ambition, will ask you to train them in the ways of the berserker. Your lessons are short and profoundly dangerous. Your first lesson on courage involves daring the student to steal the sacred sausages from the Gothi's temple. Your lesson on endurance involves seeing who can hold their breath underwater the longest. You always win. You have forgotten how many young men you have left sputtering on the banks of the fjord. Your relationship with Runa has settled into a comfortable rhythm. She no longer scolds you for your chaotic habits. She weaponizes them. When a pushy trader tries to overcharge her for dye, she simply gestures to you where you are likely wrestling a log in the yard and says, "My husband gets very angry about unfair prices." The trader usually offers her a generous discount. In return, you find a strange sort of peace watching her at her loom. The steady, rhythmic clatter, a soothing counterpoint to the noise in your own head. You are a living legend, a landmark in your own village. Young boys practice your signature roar. When a fence is found mysteriously broken, everyone just assumes you walked past it too aggressively. You are no longer just a weapon of war. You are a part of the village's identity. And so you live out your days, a grizzled old wolf who has somehow survived a life that should have ended decades ago. You are a testament to the fact that sometimes being too stubborn, too angry, and too unpredictable to die is a viable survival strategy. You may not be the storm anymore, but the thunder still rolls in your chest. And everyone in the village sleeps a little sounder for hearing it. No one lives forever, not even you. Death doesn't find you on a blood-soaked battlefield or at the end of a Saxon spear. It comes for you slowly, creeping in with the quiet chill of your final winter. The fire in your soul, which once raged hot enough to terrify armies, is now a flickering ember, and your bones ache with the memory of 1,000 fights. You spend most of your days by the hearth, wrapped in your old bearskin cloak, which now smells less of rage and more of dust and old memories. You are not afraid, you are irritated. You view death as an invisible, dishonorable foe who refuses to face you in open combat. You spend your days grumbling at it, challenging it to arm wrestle, and occasionally throwing a log at the doorway as if to scare it off. Your wife, Runa, just pats your hand and brings you warm broth. She understands that you will face the end of your life the same way you faced all of it, with stubborn, unreasonable defiance. On your last night, you are quiet. The roaring is finally gone. You look at Runa, who sits weaving by the firelight, and give a simple, content grunt. You have lived a life fuller and louder than a dozen other men. You close your eyes, and in the great silence of your mind, you mutter one final gruff command to the universe: more. Then the great storm that was your spirit finally passes, leaving behind a profound and uncharacteristic peace. Your funeral is exactly the chaotic mess you would have wanted. They try to give you a dignified send-off on a flaming longship, but two of your old berserker comrades get into a drunken argument over which of your sagas was the best and accidentally set the dock on fire before the boat is even launched. A skald begins to sing a mournful dirge, but is interrupted by another who insists on singing the comedic ballad about the geese. The two end up wrestling in the mud. It is a perfect tribute. Your legacy becomes even more unhinged now that you are gone. The stories grow wilder. you are credited with having single-handedly sunk a fleet of enemy ships by shouting at them. Some tales claim you once wrestled a sea serpent and complained that it was too slippery. In the sagas, you become less a man and more a mythical beast, a giant of impossible strength and questionable intelligence. The real youth, the grumpy, loyal, surprisingly gentle man who loved his wife and his dog, is slowly forgotten, replaced by the legend. You were a walking contradiction, a paradox of violence and fierce loyalty, of terror and unintentional comedy. You were living proof that sometimes the most powerful force in the world isn't a sharp sword or a strong shield, but a spirit that is simply too loud and too stubborn to be broken. Your roar may be silenced, but its echo will thunder through the sagas forever. But your story, the story of the wild berserker, is only one thread in the complex tapestry of Viking life. Behind the myths of blood and fury lies a surprisingly different reality, one filled with things you might not expect from these northern warriors. For instance, while you may have been covered in mud and glory, your average Viking was obsessed with something far more refined: being clean. When you picture a Viking, the image that likely springs to mind is one of rugged, grimy survival. A wild-eyed warrior, caked in the mud of a foreign field, with a beard full of yesterday's dinner. But if you were to travel back in time, you'd find that this stereotype is largely a work of fiction, crafted by the very people they raided. The surprising truth is that the Vikings were some of the most meticulously groomed and hygiene-conscious people in early medieval Europe. Archaeological digs across Scandinavia and the British Isles consistently unearth a treasure trove of personal grooming items from Viking graves and settlements. Alongside swords, axes, and shields, archaeologists find beautifully crafted combs, tweezers, razors, and even delicate ear spoons used for cleaning wax from the ears. These weren't crude, functional objects. They were often works of art, carried in personal kits with the same pride as a warrior's blade. The comb, in particular, was a Viking obsession, made from bone, antler, or wood. These weren't cheap, disposable items. They were durable, often decorated with intricate knotwork or animal designs, and clearly cherished by their owners. A Viking's comb was a status symbol, a declaration of self-respect tucked into a belt pouch. To be well combed was to be civilized. To be unkempt was to lack honor. This focus on cleanliness was deeply woven into their culture. In a society where your reputation was your most valuable currency, personal appearance was a direct reflection of your inner worth. You simply didn't attend a thing, their version of a town council meeting or a major feast, looking like you'd just wrestled a pig. A clean face, tidy hair, and neat clothes signaled that you were a person of discipline and standing. This created a fascinating paradox. The warrior peacock, the same Norseman who could endure a brutal sea voyage and charge headfirst into a shield wall, would later spend a considerable amount of time carefully oiling his beard and ensuring his tunic was spotless. The hand that swung the axe in the morning was the same hand that meticulously used a pair of tweezers in the afternoon. Ferocity and fashion were not mutually exclusive, and this wasn't just a habit of the wealthy elite. While a jarl might have a comb made of imported ivory, even a humble farmer or a slave would own a simpler version carved from wood. Unlike many other societies in medieval Europe, where filth was sometimes associated with piety or poverty, the Vikings saw no virtue in being dirty. Cleanliness was for everyone. It was a key to social success. Sagas and poems rarely describe heroes as being filthy. Instead, they are praised for their shining hair, bright eyes, and clean skin. If you wanted to win the heart of a shield maiden, or gain the respect of a chieftain, your journey began not with a sword, but with a bar of soap and a good comb. The Vikings understood that first impressions mattered, whether you were negotiating a trade deal or planning a raid. While much of medieval Europe was deeply suspicious of water, viewing bathing as a frivolous and potentially unhealthy luxury, the Vikings were practically semi-aquatic. Cleanliness wasn't a special occasion. It was a weekly, scheduled event. In fact, they loved it so much, they named a day after it. The Old Norse word for Saturday is lagerdagur, which literally translates to washing day or bath day. Your weekend routine of laundry and a long shower has ancient, seafaring roots. Bathing for a Viking wasn't a solitary chore. It was a social ritual. Families and communities would gather to wash. This could happen in a nearby river or lake during the warmer months, or in dedicated bathhouses during the freezing winters. These bathhouses, sometimes built as separate structures or as part of a longhouse, worked like primitive saunas. Stones were heated in a roaring fire until they were red hot. Then water was thrown over them to create a thick, cleansing steam. It was a place to get clean, to relax, and to socialize away from the biting cold. And yes, they had soap. It wouldn't be winning any awards for its fragrance, but it was brutally effective. Viking soap was typically made by rendering animal fat and mixing it with ash and lye, creating a harsh, alkaline substance. Think less gentle exfoliating wash and more industrial strength degreaser for your beard. It could strip away dirt, grime, and grease with formidable efficiency. This potent soap had an interesting side effect. The high lye content was strong enough to bleach hair. This led to a peculiar fashion trend, where Viking men, and sometimes women, would use the soap to lighten their hair and beards, achieving the pale blonde look that was so highly prized. So that iconic image of a blonde Viking warrior might not have been entirely genetic. It could have been the result of a very deliberate, if harsh, beauty regimen. This obsession with being clean was baffling to their enemies. English and Frankish chroniclers, who often came from cultures where full immersion bathing happened maybe once a year, wrote about the Vikings' strange habits with a mix of disgust and envy. One 11th century English writer, John of Wallingford, complained bitterly that the Danish invaders were far too popular with Anglo-Saxon noblewomen because they combed their hair every day, bathed every Saturday, and changed their clothes frequently. The locals, it seems, simply couldn't compete with the fresh-smelling, well-groomed newcomers. This was not just a male vanity project. Viking women were just as meticulous about their hygiene. They maintained their own grooming kits and took part in the weekly bathing rituals. A clean and well-kept household, including its inhabitants, was a reflection of a woman's competence and honor as the manager of the home. So, far from being the unwashed barbarians of legend, the Vikings were pioneers of personal hygiene. They embraced the bath, engineered their own soap, and turned cleanliness into a cultural institution. They understood that you could be a fearsome warrior and still smell fantastic. It was a revolutionary concept for the time. If you were to dismiss Viking fashion as nothing more than shapeless brown tunics and ragged animal furs, you'd be sorely mistaken. The Norsemen were surprisingly dapper. They embraced color, layers, and accessories with an enthusiasm that defied their fearsome reputation. In a world of sea spray and sword fights, a well-put-together outfit was a sign of success and pride. For men, the standard outfit was a masterclass in practical layering. The base was usually a long-sleeved tunic made of linen or wool, often reaching the mid-thigh. Under this, they might wear a linen undershirt for comfort. Paired with this were trousers, which were a distinct feature of Norse dress. They could be baggy or fitted, sometimes with integrated socks, and held up with a drawstring or belt. This tunican trousers combination was far more practical for riding, sailing, and fighting than the flowing robes seen elsewhere in Europe. Accessories were essential. A leather belt was not just for holding up your trousers. It was a man's primary utility strap, from which he would hang his knife, his purse, and perhaps a drinking horn. The buckle itself could be a simple iron ring or an elaborate silver-inlaid status symbol. Over everything, a man would wear a cloak, usually a simple rectangle of thick wool, fastened at the shoulder with a decorative pin called a fibula. This pin was another opportunity for personal expression, often crafted from bronze or silver into ornate animal or geometric shapes. Viking women's fashion was equally distinctive and elegant. The iconic female garment was a layered ensemble. It started with a long linen underdress, sometimes pleated. Over this, she would wear a tube-like woolen overdress, often called an apron dress or smocker. This was held up by two straps that went over the shoulders and were fastened at the front by a pair of large, ornate oval brooches. These brooches were the centerpiece of the outfit, often made of gleaming bronze or silver and intricately decorated. Hanging between these two brooches, like a wearable treasure chest, would be strands of colorful glass, amber, or jet beads. From these beaded strands, a woman might hang the essential tools of her trade, the keys to the household chests, a small knife for daily tasks, a case for sewing needles, and perhaps a pair of shears. This wasn't just jewelry. It was a public declaration of her status as the powerful manager of the household. And the Vikings loved color. Forget the drab, muddy palette you see in movies. They used natural dyes to create a surprisingly vibrant wardrobe. Madder root produced rich reds, woad created deep blues, and weld yielded bright yellows. While the most brilliant and color-fast hues were expensive and reserved for the wealthy, even the average farmer would have clothing with at least some decorative, colorful trim. To be wealthy was to be colorful. Finally, everyone wore simple leather shoes, often of the turnshoe design, which were crafted inside out and then turned, leaving the stitching on the inside for a smooth finish. In the cold, these would be stuffed with wool or grass for insulation. Fashion, for the Vikings, was a brilliant blend of form and function, a way to stay warm, carry your tools, and show off your status, all at the same time. For the Vikings, hair was not just something that grew on your head. It was a statement, a personal banner that broadcast your identity to the world. Far from the shaggy, matted manes often shown in popular culture, a Viking's hair and beard were meticulously cared for, styled, and worn with immense pride. To neglect one's hair was to neglect one's honor. The beard was the ultimate symbol of Norse masculinity. A full, well-kept beard was a sign of virility, wisdom, and authority. But this didn't mean letting it grow wild. Beards were sculpted. Sagas describe men with forked beards, intricately braided beards, and beards trimmed to a neat, square shape. Some warriors even wove small, decorative metal rings into their facial hair, adding a glint of silver or bronze to their chin. A man's beard was his signature, and he wore it with purpose. This level of grooming required maintenance. Beard oil likely a simple concoction of rendered animal fat, lanolin from wool, or vegetable oils, was used to keep the hair soft, manageable, and healthy. Fragrant herbs might be infused into the oil to give it a more pleasant scent. A clean, shiny, and tidy beard was the mark of a man who was thriving, not just surviving. Viking women took equal pride in their hair, which was typically worn long, often reaching their waists. For an unmarried girl, a simple, long braid down the back was common. A married woman, however, often wore her hair in more complex styles, such as coiled and pinned buns at the nape of the neck, or elaborate updos woven into intricate knots. These styles were often covered by a simple headscarf or cap, signaling her marital status to the community. Braiding was an art form for both men and women. It was practical, keeping long hair out of the way during work or battle, but it was also highly decorative. Braids could be simple, three-strand plaits, or complex multi-strand creations. They were sometimes interwoven with brightly colored ribbons or thin leather cords, often chosen to match the trim on their clothing. A well-executed braid was as much a display of skill as a finely woven piece of cloth. Some warriors adopted more extreme hairstyles for a deliberately intimidating effect. One popular look, sometimes called a Dane's pole, involved shaving the back and sides of the head completely, leaving a long crest of hair running down the middle from the forehead to the neck. This was a stark, aggressive style that screamed warrior and left no doubt as to the man's profession. Of course, all this styling required the right tools. The ever-present Viking comb was essential for detangling and parting. Sharp razors were used not just for a clean shave, but for tidying up necklines and cheeklines to create a sharp, defined beard shape. And small mirrors, made from highly polished metal, were necessary to ensure that every braid was perfect and every hair was in its place. Your hair told the world who you were, and the Vikings made sure it was telling the right story. Vikings were practical people, but that didn't stop them from loving a bit of flash. Jewelry, or, as they might have seen it, wearable wealth, was everywhere in the Norse world. It wasn't just for decoration. It was a public statement of your success, a portable bank account, and a way to secure loyalty. A well-dressed Viking, man or woman, was a glittering Viking. For women, brooches were the linchpin of their entire outfit. The most iconic were the large, domed oval brooches, worn in pairs on the upper chest to fasten the straps of their apron dresses. These were often cast in bronze, intricately detailed with animal patterns, and sometimes gilded to look like gold. A third, trifoil, or circular brooch, was often worn at the neck to close a cloak or shawl. A woman's set of brooches was a significant investment and a core part of her identity. For men, the ultimate status symbol was the arm ring. These were thick, heavy bands of twisted silver or gold worn on the forearm. They were more than just jewelry. They were a form of currency. This system, known as hacksilver, meant that an arm ring could be literally hacked into smaller pieces and weighed to pay for goods and services. A chieftain would often reward his loyal warriors by gifting them silver arm rings, which served as both a mark of favor and their salary. It was a brilliant system of portable, wearable wealth. Finger rings were also common for both sexes, typically featuring simple designs like twisted wires or stamped patterns. Some larger, more significant rings may have served as oath rings in important legal or social contracts. Oaths would be sworn upon such a ring in the presence of a chieftain, binding the person to their word. To wear such a ring was to carry the weight of your honor on your hand. Pendants and amulets were deeply personal and often reflected one's faith. The most famous of these is, without a doubt, Thor's hammer, or Mjolnir. Small pendants in the shape of the thunder god's hammer were worn by men, women, and children as a symbol of protection and a declaration of faith in the old ways. It was the ancient equivalent of wearing a cross, a powerful charm to ward off evil and bring strength. As the Viking Age progressed and Christianity began to take hold, the Christian cross started to appear as a pendant. For a time, it wasn't uncommon to find graves where an individual was buried wearing both a Thor's hammer and a cross. This was likely a form of spiritual insurance, with people hedging their bets by honoring both the new faith and the old gods, just in case. Beads were another essential part of the Viking look, especially for women. Colorful glass beads, often imported from as far away as the Byzantine Empire, were highly prized. They were strung together in long, eye-catching strands that hung between the brooches on a woman's dress. A woman with many strands of exotic beads was displaying her family's wealth and far-reaching trade connections for all to see. It was a subtle, beautiful, and effective way to flaunt your success. The Viking commitment to personal appearance didn't stop at clean hair and fancy clothes. There is compelling evidence to suggest they engaged in practices we would now call skincare and even makeup. These battle-hardened seafarers were not above a little cosmetic enhancement, for reasons that were both practical and personal. The most striking example is the use of kohl eyeliner. An Arab diplomat named Ahmad ibn Fadlan, who met a group of Swedish Vikings known as the Russ in the 10th century, wrote with fascination about their appearance. He noted that both men and women wore permanent tattoos, and that the men lined their eyes with a dark pigment. This wasn't just to achieve a smoldering, intimidating war paint look, although it certainly helped. Kohl has been used for centuries in sunny or snowy climates to reduce glare, acting like a primitive form of sunglasses. For a people who spent their lives on the water or in the snow-covered north, this was a brilliant piece of functional fashion. Skincare was also a practical concern in a world of harsh winds and biting cold. To protect their skin from the elements, Vikings likely used balms and salves made from a base of animal fat, such as lanolin derived from wool. This greasy but effective moisturizer would have been mixed with various herbs, plants like yarrow, known for its healing properties, or chamomile, for its soothing effects, could have been crushed and added to create remedies for chapped lips, windburn, and minor skin irritations. The Vikings also understood the power of a pleasant scent. While they didn't have bottled perfumes, they used the natural world to stay fresh. Fragrant herbs, like sweet gale or meadowsweet, were often strewn on the floors of longhouses, releasing their scent when walked upon. Bundles of these herbs might also be tucked into clothing chests to keep garments from smelling musty and to ward off moths and other insects. It was a form of functional fragrance, designed to make life a little more pleasant and a lot less buggy. They even paid attention to their teeth. Skeletons from the Viking Age often show surprisingly healthy teeth, thanks to a coarse, low-sugar diet. To keep them clean, they likely used chew sticks, small twigs from trees like birch, which were frayed on one end to create a primitive toothbrush. These could be used to scrub away food particles and keep their mouths clean. Perhaps the most extreme form of Viking personal care was decorative teeth filing. Archaeologists have found numerous skulls, especially of male warriors, from the island of Gotland. with horizontal grooves meticulously filed into their front teeth. These grooves were likely filled with colored pigments, such as black charcoal or red resin, to make them stand out. No one is entirely sure why they did this, but it may have been a mark of status for a specific group of elite warriors, a way to look even more terrifying in battle. It proves one thing for certain: the Vikings were willing to endure significant pain in the name of a killer look. Given the Viking obsession with personal appearance, it should come as no surprise that these standards were passed down to their children from a very young age. A Viking child was not left to run wild like a dirty, disheveled urchin. They were expected to be clean, presentable, and dressed as miniature versions of their parents, learning the cultural importance of a good impression long before they could wield a sword. Viking children's fashion was, for the most part, a scaled-down replica of adult clothing. Little boys wore simple wool tunics and trousers, while little girls wore long linen or wool dresses. As they grew older, girls would graduate to wearing the iconic apron dress held up by small, simple brooches. This wasn't just about looking cute. It was about integrating children into the visual identity of their culture from the moment they could walk. These clothes were built for a life of play and chores, made from durable wool and linen. They were designed for movement and could be easily layered to adapt to the harsh northern weather. But practical didn't mean drab. If a family had the means, their children's tunics would be dyed with bright colors and decorated with woven trim, especially for special occasions like seasonal feasts or religious ceremonies. A well-dressed child was a walking advertisement for a prosperous and well-managed household. Hygiene habits were also instilled early. Viking parents waged a constant war against dirt and, more importantly, lice. Children's hair was washed regularly and combed meticulously to keep it free of tangles and pests. A little girl's long hair would be kept in neat braids, while a boy's would be cut to a manageable length. A clean head of hair was a sign of a caring and attentive mother. Grooming was a fundamental part of a child's education. A mother teaching her daughter a complex braid, or a father presenting his son with his first carved bone comb, were acts of cultural transmission. These rituals taught children discipline, pride in their appearance, and the importance of self-respect. They learned that being a member of the family and the community meant looking the part. Of course, children were still children. They undoubtedly spent their days getting covered in mud, climbing trees, and getting into scrapes. But there was a clear distinction between playtime grime and formal presentation. Before any important community event, a child would be thoroughly scrubbed, put into their finest clothes, and have their hair styled. How your child looked in public was a direct reflection of your family's honor. From their first steps, Viking children were raised to embody the same values as their parents: dignity, order, and pride in one's appearance. They learned early that being a Viking wasn't just about what you did, but also about how you presented yourself to the world. They were the next generation of surprisingly stylish seafarers, and their education began in the bath and with the comb. Maintaining a polished appearance at home is one thing. It's another thing entirely when you're crammed into a longship with 30 other warriors, surrounded by sea spray, or marching through a muddy foreign landscape. Yet, the Vikings managed to uphold their grooming standards even on campaign. Their dedication to cleanliness was not a peacetime luxury. It was a fundamental part of their discipline as travelers and warriors. A Viking warrior didn't leave his grooming kit behind any more than he would his axe, tucked into a leather pouch on his belt. alongside a fire-starting kit and a whetstone, would be his essential tools: a sturdy comb, a pair of tweezers, and perhaps a small, sharp razor. These were not considered frivolous items. They were part of a warrior's standard equipment, essential for maintaining order and health on the road. Life on a longship was cramped and exposed to the elements, but basic hygiene was still practiced. A bucket of cold seawater would have to suffice for washing your face and hands. Keeping hair and beards combed and braided was even more critical at sea, as it prevented them from becoming a hopelessly tangled, salt-crusted mess after weeks of wind and spray. A tidy braid was a small piece of personal order in the vast chaos of the ocean. During a raid or military campaign, cleanliness was a matter of professional pride and practicality. A neat beard was less likely to get caught on a shield strap or a bowstring. A clean-shaven neck prevented chafing from a helmet or mail coif. Keeping hands and minor cuts clean could prevent the kinds of infections that could take a warrior out of a fight more surely than a sword blow. It was about efficiency, not vanity. Clothing and gear were also meticulously maintained. Warriors would carry a small sewing kit, often in a carved bone needle case, containing needles and waxed linen thread. On an evening halt, they would be seen patching tears in their tunics, restitching a loose shoe sole, or reinforcing a strap on their gear. A warrior with ragged, failing equipment was an undisciplined warrior and a liability to his comrades. Whenever they set up camp, finding a source of fresh water like a stream or river was a top priority. This was not just for drinking and cooking. It was an opportunity for a proper wash, a chance to rinse the sweat and grime from their bodies and clothes. The image of a fearsome war band taking a moment to collectively bathe and do their laundry by a riverbank is a far cry from the barbarian stereotype. But it was a common reality. Even the moments before a battle could involve grooming. Sagas describe heroes combing their hair as they prepared for a fight. This was a ritual of mental preparation, a moment of calm to center oneself before the storm. It was also a way to ensure that you would face the enemy and potentially the gods, looking your best, an honorable warrior, neat and ready for whatever fate had in store. So, it's time to put the myth of the filthy Viking to rest. The image of the grimy, mud-caked brute is one of the most enduring stereotypes in history. But it's largely a fiction, a masterful piece of character assassination written by their victims. After all, if a horde of well-coiffed, nicely dressed seafarers just burned down your monastery and made off with your silver, you're not likely to compliment their hygiene in your official account of the event. You're going to paint them as stinking, savage monsters. The truth, as we've seen, is that the Vikings were likely some of the cleanest and most style-conscious people in their corner of the world. They bathed weekly, they prized their combs, they oiled their beards, and they wore colorful, layered clothing. They were, in many ways, the polar opposite of the they've been saddled with. The best evidence for this comes from their enemies. The grumbling English monks, who complained that Viking invaders were too clean, changed their clothes too often, and were thus unfairly successful with local women, tell us everything we need to know. It was a backhanded compliment of the highest order, an admission that the Norsemen's standards of personal grooming were simply higher than their own. Now, this isn't to say that every Viking looked like they had just stepped out of a salon every minute of the day. Theirs was a hard, physical life of farming, sailing, and fighting. There was undoubtedly sweat, dirt, and blood. But the crucial difference was their attitude. Dirt was something to be washed off, not ignored. Cleanliness was a cultural value, a mark of honor and self-respect that distinguished them from many of their contemporaries. Their dedication to appearance was a lifelong commitment. They were born into it, practiced it on the battlefield, and even planned to take it with them into the afterlife. The constant discovery of grooming kits in Viking graves is the final, compelling proof. A comb, a razor, a pair of tweezers, these were considered essential possessions, as vital to one's identity as a warrior's axe or a woman's household keys. But the Vikings were not the only ancient culture whose fearsome reputation concealed a far more complex and surprising social reality. In the sun-scorched hills of ancient Greece, another warrior society was busy building a legend of its own. The Spartans, known for their brutal discipline and unmatched military prowess, also had a set of social rules that shocked the ancient world, particularly when it came to the role of their women. While most Greek women were confined to the home, hidden from public view and stripped of any legal or economic power, Spartan women were a different breed entirely. They were educated, outspoken, they owned land, and they wielded a level of influence that was unheard of. They were the strong, disciplined, and shockingly liberated mothers of the most feared army in history, and their story is just as compelling as any Viking saga. In most city-states of ancient Greece, a respectable woman's life was one of near total seclusion. She was expected to be silent, obedient, and invisible, her world confined to the domestic sphere. But if you were to travel south to the rigid, militaristic state of Sparta, you would find something utterly revolutionary. Spartan women were not hidden away. They were out in the open, owning land, expressing opinions, and radiating a confidence that would have scandalized an Athenian. Imagine walking through the public square in Sparta. You would see women conversing freely with men, managing business affairs, and striding about with an air of authority. There were no veils, no chaperones, no downcast eyes. A Spartan woman knew her place, and it was not in the shadows. This shocking level of freedom was not born from an enlightened sense of gender equality, but from Sparta's singular, all-consuming obsession, warfare. The Spartan state was, first and foremost, a machine for producing the world's finest soldiers, and the Spartans believed, with unwavering conviction, that strong warriors could only come from strong mothers. From the moment a Spartan girl was born, she was raised not to be delicate, but to be durable. Her value to the state was her ability to produce healthy, robust sons who would one day join the phalanx. To this end, girls in Sparta received a formal, state-sponsored education that was nearly as rigorous as the boys. They engaged in intense physical training, running, wrestling, throwing the discus and javelin, and competing in public athletic events. This wasn't to prepare them for battle, but to ensure they were in peak physical condition for their primary duty. Childbirth. A fit body was a patriotic body. But their education was not purely physical. Unlike most other Greek women who were kept illiterate, Spartan girls were taught to read and write. They studied music and dance, which were vital for the religious choral performances that were a cornerstone of civic life. And most importantly, they were taught how to speak their minds. Spartan women were famous throughout Greece for their sharp, laconic wit and their often brutal honesty. There is the famous tale of a Spartan mother handing her son his shield before he departs for war, telling him to return either with it or on it, meaning come back a victor or come back dead. There was no room for cowardice. This was the standard of maternal encouragement in Sparta. Perhaps most radically, Spartan women could legally inherit and own property. With their husbands often away for years on military campaigns, women were the de facto managers of the Spartan economy. At the height of Sparta's power, it's estimated that women owned between 1/3 and 2/5 of all the land. This economic independence gave them a level of real-world power and autonomy that was simply unthinkable anywhere else in the ancient world. They weren't just the mothers of warriors. They were their financiers. If you thought Spartan education was strange, their marriage customs were even more bizarre. In a society that valued military discipline above all else, romance and domestic life were treated with suspicion. Marriage was not a romantic union. It was a state-mandated duty for the purpose of procreation. And the wedding ceremony itself was less a celebration and more a covert operation. When a Spartan man and woman were to be married, an arrangement typically made between their families for practical reasons of wealth and lineage. There was no public feast or exchange of vows. Instead, the marriage began with a ritual abduction. On an appointed night, the groom would steal his bride, carrying her off from her family home. This was not a violent act, but a highly symbolic performance, a piece of theater that everyone was in on. The bride was then taken to a dark room by a female attendant or bridesmaid. Here, she underwent a strange transformation. Her head was shaved, completely bald. She was dressed in a man's simple cloak and sandals, and then left alone on a straw pallet on the floor to await her new husband. The meaning of this ritual is still debated, but it likely served to emphasize her femininity and symbolically initiate her into the masculine, disciplined world of Spartan life. The groom's part in this was equally strange. After the abduction, he did not move in with his wife. He was required by law to continue living in the military barracks with his fellow soldiers. To consummate the marriage, he had to sneak out of the barracks under the cover of darkness, visit his wife in secret, and then hurry back before sunrise, hoping not to be caught. This clandestine arrangement wasn't meant to be a punishment. It was a core part of the Spartan system. The state wanted to ensure that a man's primary loyalty remained with his comrades in the barracks, not with his new wife. By making marriage a series of brief, secret encounters, they believed it would prevent men from becoming too attached to domestic life and distracted from their military duties. Some even argued that the infrequency of these meetings would make both partners more passionate, leading to the conception of stronger children. This wasn't a short-term arrangement. A Spartan man was obligated to live in the barracks until he was 30 years old. This meant a couple could be married for a decade or more, having children and building a family, all while living in separate houses. The husband was essentially a visitor in his own home, a secret lover to his own wife. Even the birth of children didn't change this. A son would be raised by his mother for his first 7 years, rarely seeing his father by daylight. Then, he too would be taken from the home to begin his own brutal training in the Agoj, the state-run military school. In Sparta, the needs of the army always came first, and family life was a distant, secondary concern. In Sparta, being a mother was not a gentle, nurturing role. It was a high stakes. A woman's honor, her status, and her entire value to society were measured by her ability to produce and raise children who could serve the Spartan war machine. Her home was not just a domestic space. It was the first training ground for future soldiers, and she was the first drill sergeant. This process began at birth and was terrifyingly pragmatic. When a child was born in Sparta, it was not immediately swaddled and cooed over. It was taken by the father to be examined by a council of village elders. They would inspect the infant for any signs of physical deformity or weakness. If the child was deemed healthy and strong, it was returned to its parents to be raised. If it was found to be sickly or imperfect, it was taken to a chasm near Mount Tagados and left to die of exposure. This brutal practice of infanticide reflected Sparta's obsession with perfection. There was no room for weakness in their society. For a woman who gave birth to a healthy, thriving son, however, there was immense honor. She had fulfilled her sacred duty to the state. Her status within the community would rise, and she would be praised for her contribution. She wasn't just a mother. She was a successful producer of a vital state asset. The mother's role in the early years of a boy's life was crucial until the age of 7, when he would be handed over to the state for formal military training. His mother was responsible for instilling in him the core Spartan virtues. She taught him to endure pain without crying, to obey without question, and to never show fear. She was raising him not to be happy, but to be hard. This steely resolve is captured in the sayings attributed to Spartan mothers, which have become legendary. They were known to express pride, not sorrow, upon hearing that their sons had died bravely in battle. To them, a glorious death in service to Sparta was the greatest achievement a son could have. One story even tells of a mother who, when her son fled a battle and returned home in disgrace, killed him herself for his cowardice. While likely an exaggeration, it illustrates the extreme values they were expected to uphold. Mothers were also responsible for raising their daughters, and they molded them in their own image. They taught them to be physically strong, mentally sharp, and fiercely independent. A Spartan girl was raised to be the future mother of warriors, and she was expected to have the same iron will and discipline as the men. In this sense, motherhood in Sparta was a form of national service. The women of Sparta were the gatekeepers of the next generation, the ones who decided who was fit to live and who was not. Their homes were the first barracks, and their lessons in discipline and endurance were the foundation upon which the most feared army in the ancient world was built. While their role as the mothers of warriors was the primary source of their honor, the most tangible source of a Spartan woman's power was cold, hard, and grew from the earth, land. In a world where women were often treated as property themselves, Spartan women were property owners, and on a scale that was unprecedented in ancient Greece. This economic independence was the true foundation of their unique freedom. Under Spartan law, women were not only allowed to inherit property, but they often did. A daughter could inherit from her father, particularly if she had no brothers, becoming the keeper of the family estate. More significantly, a wife inherited from her husband. In a society where the male life expectancy was perilously low due to constant warfare, this meant that Sparta was home to a large and influential class of wealthy, landowning widows. These women were not passive landlords, with the entire male citizen body dedicated to full-time military service. The day-to-day management of Sparta's agricultural economy fell almost entirely to them. They were responsible for directing the labor of the helots, the state-owned serfs who worked the land, and ensuring the productivity of their estates. They managed finances, negotiated contracts, and effectively ran the country's economic engine while the men were away. This economic power granted them a level of autonomy that was the envy of the Greek world. A Spartan woman did not need a male guardian to represent her in legal or financial matters. She could conduct business in her own name, a right that gave her real authority and influence within the community. This power was so significant that the philosopher Aristotle, a man from the much more patriarchal Athens, later complained that Sparta was a gynecocratia, a society ruled by women, and blamed their influence for Sparta's eventual decline. Of course, Aristotle was viewing Sparta through an Athenian lens. He was scandalized by the sight of women who were not only visible and vocal, but also economically powerful. In his world, such a thing was a sign of societal collapse. In Sparta, however, it was a practical necessity. If the men were to be permanent soldiers, someone had to run the country. That someone was the Spartan woman. Her empowerment was not a product of an early feminist movement, but a logical, if radical, consequence of Sparta's military-first ideology. The state, in its relentless pursuit of military excellence, had inadvertently created one of the most liberated female populations of the ancient world. They were strong, educated, and economically independent, all in the service of producing the perfect soldier. And so we leave these two remarkable warrior cultures, the Vikings and the Spartans. One, a society of seafaring raiders who valued a clean beard as much as a sharp axe. The other, a rigid military state that gave its women shocking levels of freedom. Both are reminders that history is always more complex and surprising than the myths we tell about it. Thank you for joining us on this journey into the past here at Medieval Nocturnes. If you enjoyed drifting through these ancient worlds, please do subscribe and perhaps leave a comment to let us know where you're listening from. For now, may your night be peaceful and your sleep be deep.